Have you ever wondered what happens when a man fights back against a corrupt system? Officers Hale and his team ruled the streets with unchecked power, their badges shields against consequence. Raymond Carter knew their type, cops who saw black men as easy targets, who used their authority to harass, brutalize, and bury the truth beneath falsified reports and lost evidence. He had watched it happen too many times, seen neighbors pulled over for nothing, friends humiliated on the sidewalk, families torn apart by a system designed to protect its own. But Raymond wasn't just another man to be silenced. He was a former Marine, trained to endure, to fight, to survive, and he wasn't going to wait for the next victim. He was going to expose them. He was going to make sure the world saw the truth. Could one man's trap change everything you thought you knew about justice? Setting the trap was dangerous, but necessary, a hidden camera, a staged encounter, undeniable proof. He would give them the opportunity to do what they had always done, and when they did, there would be no way to spin it, no way to bury it this time. Justice wouldn't just be demanded, it would be inevitable. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe to Dark Threads. Raymond Carter walked slowly along the cracked sidewalk, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets, as a chill breeze swept through the neighborhood. He had called this place home for nearly 15 years, longer than anywhere else in his life. It wasn't perfect, his street had its fair share of boarded-up windows, and the little corner store he used to frequent had closed months ago, but it was still home. To him, at least, to others, it seemed like a problem to be solved. The signs were subtle at first. Police cruisers started lingering a little too long on certain blocks, slowing down as kids played outside or as an elderly couple sat on their stoop. Then the questions began. What are you doing here? Where are you headed? Questions asked in sharp, clipped tones, as if just existing in this space was a crime. Raymond had brushed off the first few incidents. He was a former Marine, he'd been through worse, but it didn't stop, it only grew worse. A few months ago, they'd pulled over his neighbor, an older man who ran a small cleaning business. They called it a routine stop, but everyone knew what it was. A black man in a van full of cleaning supplies must have looked suspicious. The man's granddaughter had filmed the whole thing from her phone. It circulated online for a while, people were outraged, but then the attention died down, nothing changed. That was what finally got under Raymond's skin, the helpless feeling of watching his neighbors, his friends, his community endure the same harassment day after day with no real recourse. He'd been trained to defend people, to protect the vulnerable, and here he was, just letting it happen. He first heard about Lisa Tanner from a friend who had once tipped her off about a predatory landlord in another part of the city. She's one of the good ones, his friend had said, doesn't twist your words, doesn't stop until she finds the truth. Raymond had been skeptical. Reporters weren't exactly on his list of trusted people, especially the ones who swooped into neighborhoods like his hunting for stories. But when she contacted him, she didn't sound like someone hunting for a scoop, she sounded curious, serious. She showed up at the community center where Raymond was fixing a leaky pipe, a petite woman with sharp features and even sharper eyes. She introduced herself and got straight to the point. I've been hearing about what's happening around here, I think there's a bigger story. Raymond eyed her suspiciously. A bigger story, huh? And what are you going to do with it? Write an article that gets buried in the back pages? I'll do more than write an article, Lisa said firmly. I'll make sure people can't look away. I don't just want to talk about what's going on here, I want to show it. He didn't say yes right away. Over the next week, Lisa kept showing up. She talked to other residents, asked questions, listened more than she spoke. Each time she came back to Raymond, you're the one who can help me make this happen, she'd tell him. People respect you, they'll see what's really happening if you're the one showing them. Raymond had shaken his head the first few times. I don't need that kind of attention, he'd say. What if it makes things worse? Lisa's response was always the same. What if it makes them better? It wasn't like Raymond to trust reporters, but Lisa's persistence made an impression. She wasn't just passing through, she seemed determined to stay until something changed. By the end of their last conversation, Raymond found himself agreeing, if only because someone had to do it. It was her idea to go undercover. People need to see it, she'd said, not just hear it, not just read about it, they need to see it happen. Raymond adjusted his jacket and set off down the block. This was it, no turning back. He didn't know what was going to happen, but he knew he couldn't stay silent anymore. Raymond strode toward the upscale neighborhood, each step measured and deliberate. It was a short walk, But the change in scenery came quickly. The boarded-up windows and cracked sidewalks gave way to neatly trimmed hedges and driveways with luxury cars parked in them. He passed a family unloading groceries, their SUV gleaming in the late afternoon sunlight. The mother glanced his way, her smile faltering slightly as her eyes lingered on him. He knew the look well. It wasn't open hostility, but it wasn't warm either. It was that cautious, assessing gaze that hinted at suspicion. He kept moving, forcing himself not to react. This wasn't new. He was here to show the world what happened next. A few blocks in, the neighborhood grew quieter. The only sounds were the faint hum of a lawnmower and the rhythmic swish of sprinklers. Raymond adjusted his jacket slightly, feeling the hidden camera pressing against his chest. He could hear Lisa's voice in his head, reminding him to stay calm, natural. "Afternoon," a middle-aged man said, stepping out onto his porch with a newspaper tucked under his arm. The man's smile was friendly enough, but his gaze lingered a moment too long. Raymond nodded. "Afternoon." The man tilted his head, his smile wavering. "You live around here?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual, but not quite succeeding. "No," Raymond said simply, "just walking through." The man's smile disappeared completely, replaced by a tight, polite nod. "Enjoy your walk," he said, his tone cooler now. Raymond kept moving, his footsteps deliberate but relaxed. Inside though, his thoughts churned. He didn't have to look back to know the man on the porch was still watching him. Further down the block, a police cruiser idled at a stop sign. Raymond's stomach tightened as he passed, but he made himself look straight ahead. The officers inside didn't move at first, but the longer he stayed on the same street, the more obvious it became they were watching him too. At the next corner, the cruiser slowly rolled forward. It wasn't fast enough to catch up, but it wasn't idle anymore. Raymond's mind churned. Was this it? Was it starting already? When he reached the next block, he noticed a second cruiser parked on the side of the road. Two officers leaned against it, talking casually, but their eyes followed him as he approached. One of them said something to the other, and both began to move toward him. Raymond's pulse quickened. He glanced around, nothing but quiet homes and manicured lawns. He focused on his breathing, just as he'd learned in the Marines. Stay calm, stay steady. "Excuse me, sir," one of the officers called out, "can we have a word?" Raymond stopped, standing tall. "Sure," he said, "what can I do for you?" The officer, a broad man with a square jaw, stepped closer. "We got a call about someone matching your description, said you were acting suspicious." Raymond raised an eyebrow. "Suspicious how?" The officer crossed his arms. "Just wandering around, not from around here, are you?" "I'm just taking a walk," Raymond replied evenly. The second officer, taller and thinner, joined the conversation. "Well, we're going to need some ID, just routine." Raymond hesitated. "Am I being detained?" "Not yet," the first officer said, a smirk tugging at his lips. Raymond kept his voice steady. "If I'm not being detained, I'd like to be on my way." The officers exchanged a glance. The first one's smile vanished. "Not so fast, we have some questions." Raymond clenched his jaw. This was the moment he'd prepared for, the moment Lisa had warned him about, the moment that would be caught on camera. "You don't see many guys like you around here," the taller officer said, his eyes narrowing. "Big guy like you walking through a neighborhood like this stands out, don't you think?" Raymond's voice was calm but firm. "I'm just walking." The shorter officer stepped closer, his smirk returning. "Walking, you mean waddling? Maybe you're just out for a stroll, but most people don't call that exercise." The officers chuckled, the taller one shaking his head. "You sure you're not just out here casing the place? Big guy like you must be looking for an easy target, right?" Raymond's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. "I'm just walking," he repeated. "Well," the shorter officer said, his smirk now a sneer, "maybe you should walk a little faster before things get complicated." Raymond didn't flinch. He didn't let his anger show. He knew the camera was rolling, knew Lisa would be watching this later. "I'm not doing anything wrong," he said. The taller officer took another step closer, now towering over him. "No, you're not," he said slowly, "but you sure don't look like you belong here." "Looks can be deceiving," Raymond said, his voice still calm, but there was an edge to it now, "and I'm not moving." The officers stared at him for a long moment, the tension heavy in the air. It crackled like static electricity. The officers stood closer than necessary, their body language shifting from casual curiosity to subtle aggression. Raymond had seen this kind of posturing before, chest puffed out, arms crossed, the barely restrained urge to assert dominance. He stayed still, his feet planted firmly on the sidewalk, his hands at his sides, calm, controlled. He knew the camera was catching all of it. "So you're refusing to cooperate," the shorter officer said, his smirk curling into something more menacing. "I never said that," Raymond replied, his voice steady, even, measured. "I told you I'm just out for a walk." The taller officer raised an eyebrow, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Just out for a walk, huh? Dressed like that?" "Dressed like what?" Raymond asked. "What's wrong with what I'm wearing?" "Nothing," the shorter officer said, his grin reappearing. "Just looks a little out of place, like you're not from around here." "I already told you," Raymond said, holding his ground. "I'm just walking through." "Well, maybe you should walk yourself back where you came from," the taller officer snapped. "You think these people want to see you standing around here?" Raymond didn't flinch. "I have every right to be here," he said calmly. "I'm not breaking any laws." "Your attitude is what's suspicious," the shorter officer shot back. "Guy like you, big and heavy, just wandering through, looking at these houses like they're free for the taking." Raymond's jaw tightened. "I haven't done anything wrong," he said firmly. "You stopped me, I'm just walking." The taller officer sneered. "Listen, buddy, I don't know what you think you're doing here, but I don't trust it. You don't look like you belong in this neighborhood, and you sure as hell don't act like you do." "What's that supposed to mean?" Raymond asked, his voice still calm, though his patience was wearing thin. "It means," the shorter officer said, stepping closer, "that maybe we need to have a little chat down at the station, just to be sure." "That sounds an awful lot like you're detaining me," Raymond said, meeting the officer's eyes, "and if that's the case, I'd like to know what law I've broken." "You've got a smart mouth," the taller officer muttered. He leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing. "Maybe you're not breaking any laws, but you're pissing me off, and that's enough to make you a problem." Raymond kept his expression neutral. "Last I checked, that's not a crime." The shorter officer laughed, though it sounded forced. "You think you're clever, don't you, big tough guy with all the answers? Let's see how clever you are when we bring you in." "Bring me in for what?" Raymond asked, his voice remained calm, but the edge was sharper now. "I told you what I'm doing. I'm walking through this neighborhood. That's not a crime." "It is when you're casing houses," the taller officer shot back. His tone wasn't sarcastic anymore, it was firm, deliberate, and dangerous. "Casing houses?" Raymond asked, a slight rise in his voice. "That's ridiculous, I'm just walking." "We've got reports," the shorter officer said, his grin gone now. "A big guy, black, matching your description, going door to door, trying to look for easy targets." Raymond narrowed his eyes. "You're lying. You never got a call." The taller officer stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. "Are you calling us liars, sir?" "I'm calling it what it is," Raymond replied, "an excuse." "Excuses don't land people in cuffs," the shorter officer said, "but keep this up, and we'll see if we need to get you down to the station for some questioning." Raymond's pulse quickened, but he held his ground. "I've done nothing wrong, I'm not casing houses, I'm not robbing anyone, and you know that." "Is that so?" the taller officer said, a sneer curling at the edge of his mouth. "Because from where I'm standing, it sure looks like you've been hanging around a little too long, and it sure looks like you're looking for something more than just a walk." Raymond took a slow breath, steadying himself. The camera was still rolling, capturing every word, every sneer, every accusation, but he could feel the temperature rising, the air thick with tension. "I'm not robbing anyone," Raymond said again, his voice clear and firm, "and if you're going to accuse me of that, you'd better be ready to back it up with more than just your assumptions." The officers exchanged a glance. Their confidence didn't falter, but the lines in their faces hardened, their postures stiffened. They weren't letting him go. The officers' expressions darkened, the sneers turning into something colder. Raymond could feel the weight of their stares, the way they stood too close, their hands inching toward their belts. He didn't move, he couldn't afford to. He knew how quickly situations like this could spiral out of control. "You don't seem to understand," the shorter officer said, his voice low and menacing. "You're not just going to walk away from this." Raymond's jaw tightened. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me exactly what I've done wrong." The taller officer stepped even closer, towering over him. "You've got a smart mouth, don't you? Maybe you're used to talking back to people, but out here, that's not going to fly." "I'm not talking back," Raymond said, his voice steady. "I'm just asking for some clarity." "Clarity?" The shorter officer barked a laugh. "You're in the wrong neighborhood, big man. Clarity's not going to help you here." Raymond stood his ground. "I'm not going to let you intimidate me." That was when it happened. The taller officer's hand shot out, shoving Raymond hard in the chest. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't a light push, it was a full-force attempt to knock him off balance. Raymond staggered back, but didn't fall. His training kicked in instinctively, steadying his stance. "Hey," Raymond barked, his voice sharper now, "what's your problem?" "My problem is you," the taller officer snapped, stepping forward again. "You think you can just stand here and run your mouth like you're untouchable?" Raymond raised his hands, palms open. "I'm not looking for trouble, I'm just standing here." The shorter officer smirked. "Maybe you should have thought of that before you mouthed off." "Mouthed off," Raymond repeated, his voice rising. "I'm just asking you why you're stopping me. I'm not threatening anyone." "You put hands on me, you're lucky that's all we did," the taller officer snarled, closing the distance again. "Guys like you think you can do whatever you want, not in this neighborhood." Raymond's heart pounded, but he kept his voice firm. "I don't have to explain myself to you, I'm not doing anything illegal, you've got no reason to be in my face." The words barely left his mouth when the shorter officer reached out, grabbing at his arm. Raymond yanked it back, but the movement escalated the tension in an instant. The taller officer seized the opportunity, reaching for Raymond's jacket collar. They weren't just questioning him now, they were making it physical. "Don't touch me," Raymond snapped, his voice loud enough to carry. He wasn't shouting, but the command in his tone was impossible to ignore. "Or what?" the shorter officer sneered, his grip tightening. "Or I'll defend myself," Raymond warned. He wasn't bluffing, he knew he couldn't afford to make the first move, but he also knew he wasn't going to let himself be manhandled. The taller officer shoved him again, harder this time. Raymond stumbled back, his shoulder brushing against a nearby lamppost. It was clear now, they wanted a reaction, they wanted him to fight back so they could claim he was the aggressor, but Raymond wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. "I'm warning you," Raymond said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. "Let go of me." The shorter officer pulled back for a moment, just long enough to exchange a glance with his partner, then without another word, he swung. The punch caught Raymond off guard, glancing off his jaw, but not knocking him down. The pain was sharp, sudden, but it also flipped a switch in his mind. He didn't have a choice anymore, they'd started it, and now he had to defend himself. Raymond ducked as the taller officer swung next, the punch missing him by inches. He planted his feet and shoved back, using his size and strength to create space. The officers didn't stop, the shorter one lunged again, and this time Raymond caught his arm and twisted it just enough to make him yelp and let go. "Enough," Raymond shouted, "I don't want to fight you." The taller officer stepped in again, his face twisted in anger. "Yeah, well, you got one anyway." The fight moved into the street. Raymond kept his movements tight, controlled, not throwing wild punches, but using calculated blocks and counters to keep the officers from overwhelming him. It wasn't a brawl, it was tactical, almost surgical. His military training had taught him how to neutralize threats quickly, but he was holding back. He didn't want to hurt them, even though they clearly had no such hesitation. The taller officer threw another punch, this time connecting with Raymond's shoulder. He staggered, but didn't fall. Instead, he used the momentum to step to the side and deliver a quick open-handed strike to the officer's forearm, forcing him to drop back. The shorter officer tried to grab him from behind, but Raymond spun, breaking the hold and shoving him away. They kept coming. Every time Raymond deflected one, the other would attack. His breathing was heavy now, each move deliberate but tiring. He wasn't going to go down easily, though. He wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Raymond's breath came fast and heavy, his muscles tensed as he moved with precision, blocking one officer while bracing for the other. He wasn't trying to win this fight, he was trying to survive it. He had been trained for combat, but this wasn't war. He was fighting two men who had the power to make him the villain no matter how much he tried to hold back. The taller officer lunged at him again, fists swinging wildly. Raymond ducked, weaving just in time to avoid a direct hit to the face. Instead, the officer's knuckles scraped across his temple, sending a sharp sting through his skull. He clenched his jaw, his instincts screaming at him to strike back. "Stop this," Raymond bellowed, stepping back, hands raised in a defensive posture. "I don't want to fight." The shorter officer spat at the ground, his chest heaving. "You don't get to decide that, fat boy." Raymond's blood ran hot, but he swallowed the insult, forcing himself to stay composed. He backed up another step, trying to put more distance between them. If he could just keep them from closing in, maybe. The taller officer didn't give him a chance to finish the thought. He rushed forward again, this time slamming his shoulder into Raymond's chest, knocking him backward onto the pavement. Pain exploded through Raymond's back as he hit the ground hard, the rough asphalt scraping against his skin beneath his clothes. Before he could get up, a boot came down on his arm, pinning him. "Got you now, big guy," the shorter officer sneered, pressing his weight onto Raymond's forearm. Raymond gritted his teeth, feeling the strength ebbing in his arm as the pressure increased. The taller officer crouched down, his face inches from Raymond's. "You think you're tough, huh? Think you can just walk through here like you belong?" Raymond tried to yank his arm free, but the officer twisted his foot, grinding it into his muscle. He bit back a groan, refusing to give them the satisfaction of hearing him in pain. "I didn't do anything," he forced out. The shorter officer crouched, his smirk widening. "You didn't do enough, fat boy, you should have known better." He punctuated the words with a hard punch to Raymond's gut. A deep pain shot through his stomach, forcing the breath from his lungs. He coughed, gasping for air, his body involuntarily curling inward. The taller officer laughed. "Not so tough now, are you?" Raymond clenched his fists, his vision swam for a moment, but his mind was clear. If he didn't do something, they weren't going to stop. He exhaled sharply and moved. Using his core strength, he twisted his body, jerking his trapped arm free just as the officer's balance wavered. The sudden motion sent the shorter officer stumbling to the side, just enough for Raymond to push himself halfway up. The taller officer grabbed for him, but this time Raymond didn't just block, he struck. A solid elbow to the ribs sent the officer reeling back with a grunt. Raymond surged upward, adrenaline pumping through his veins. The shorter officer rushed him, but Raymond stepped aside, using his opponent's momentum against him. The officer stumbled forward, and Raymond shoved him, sending him sprawling onto the ground. "Stay down," Raymond growled, his voice low, commanding. He was still trying to end this without going too far, but the officers weren't done. The taller one came at him again, swinging with full force this time. The punch connected, landing across Raymond's jaw. His head snapped to the side, the taste of blood filling his mouth. The shorter officer recovered, grabbing at Raymond's jacket, yanking hard. Raymond staggered, trying to keep his footing, but they were both on him now. The blows came fast, fists slamming into his ribs, into his arms as he tried to shield himself. They weren't just subduing him, they wanted to hurt him. Another punch caught him in the stomach, then another. His legs buckled, and he dropped to one knee, gasping for air. The shorter officer grabbed his collar, yanking him up. "Not so big now, huh?" Raymond could barely hear him over the ringing in his ears. His body ached, his vision blurred at the edges. He had tried to hold back, tried to de-escalate, but they weren't stopping, they weren't going to stop, and he had nothing left to give. The baton came down on his shoulder first, a brutal strike that sent a jolt of pain down his arm. He barely had time to register it before another hit slammed into his ribs. He gasped, his body instinctively curling inward. "Still up," the taller officer snarled. "Let's fix that." A sharp crack sounded as the baton struck the back of his knee, forcing him fully onto the ground. Raymond coughed, trying to push himself up, but the shorter officer kicked him in the ribs, rolling him onto his back. "You should have just gone home," the shorter officer muttered, before bringing the baton down again, this time against Raymond's side, hard and fast. Pain exploded through his ribs, his breath came in short, shallow gasps. He tried to curl away from the blows, but the taller officer pressed his boot against Raymond's chest, holding him down. "Stop resisting," the officer barked, his voice mocking. "I'm not." Raymond's words were cut off as the baton struck his arm again, his vision blurred at the edges, but he held on, barely. Then came the weight, the combined force of both officers as they wrenched his arms behind his back, his wrists twisted unnaturally, the cold bite of metal snapping around them. The handcuffs dug in, hard, too tight, cutting into his skin. Raymond lay there, chest heaving, pain pulsing through every inch of his body. The taller officer leaned down, his breath hot against Raymond's ear. "You should have just walked away." Raymond didn't respond, he didn't trust himself to. He kept his head turned to the side, his cheek pressed into the street, but he wasn't defeated, he wasn't broken. They didn't know it yet, but the whole world was about to see exactly what they had done. Raymond lay still on the pavement, his body aching from the repeated strikes, the cold metal of the cuffs bit into his wrists, his breathing ragged as the weight of both officers finally lifted off him. His cheek pressed against the rough asphalt, the scent of blood and sweat thick in the air. He didn't fight as they hauled him up, his muscles screaming in protest as they yanked his arms higher than necessary. "On your feet," one of them muttered, pulling him up without care for his injuries. His ribs throbbed with every breath, his legs unsteady beneath him. The world tilted for a moment, but he kept himself upright. The officers led him toward the waiting squad car, the distant murmur of voices from a few onlookers carrying through the air. A couple of people stood on their porches, watching, some shook their heads, no one intervened. The door opened, and they pushed him inside. The seat was hard and uncomfortable, the partition in front of him smeared with fingerprints from previous arrests. Raymond leaned his head back against the seat, exhaling slowly. His body ached, his mind still racing through the events that led to this moment. Outside, the officers spoke with another who had arrived late. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but he didn't need to. Their body language said enough, casual, relaxed, it was routine to them. The car pulled away, the flashing lights casting a faint glow against the darkened streets. Raymond stared out the window, watching the quiet neighborhood fade behind them. The roads were empty, the houses still. He wondered how many of them had seen what happened, how many of them had looked away. The ride was silent for a while, the occasional crackle of the radio the only sound. Then one of the officers spoke without turning around. "Long night ahead." Raymond didn't respond, he had nothing to say to them. The station came into view, its harsh lights glaring against the night sky as they pulled into the lot. He braced himself for what came next. The doors opened, and they pulled him out. The ground felt unsteady beneath his feet, or maybe it was just the exhaustion setting in. Inside the station was cold and sterile, the scent of stale coffee and disinfectant lingering in the air. "Charges?" the officer at the desk asked, without looking up. "Trespassing, resisting, assaulting an officer." Raymond's jaw tightened. "That's not true." The officer at the desk barely glanced at him. "Take it up later." They led him to a holding cell, the metal bars clanging shut behind him. The space was small, the bench against the wall the only place to sit. Raymond exhaled, lowering himself onto the bench with a slow breath. His ribs ached with every movement, the dull pulse of pain settling into his muscles. He rolled his shoulders, testing the strain. Across town, Lisa's phone buzzed against her desk. She barely had time to register the number before answering, her pulse quickening at the urgency in the voice on the other end. "They arrested him." Lisa sat up straight. "What, Raymond?" "They've got him in holding." She gripped the phone tighter, already reaching for her bag. "Tell me you got footage." "More than enough." Lisa was out the door before they finished speaking. Back in the cell, Raymond didn't know how long they planned to keep him here. He didn't know what they would try next, but he did know one thing: Lisa had the footage, and once it got out, this wasn't going to end the way they thought it would. The cold from the concrete bench seeped through Raymond's clothes as he sat with his back against the cell wall, his hands resting loosely in his lap. His fingers tingled from the tight cuffs they had only just removed, the skin around his wrists raw. The dull pulse of pain throbbed in his ribs, his body stiff from the beating. Every inhale sent a sharp sting through his side, and he knew at least one of the strikes had bruised something deep. He rolled his shoulders and let his head tilt back against the wall, staring up at the ceiling. The fluorescent lights hummed softly, a sound that blended with the occasional murmur of voices beyond the bars. The station wasn't loud, but it wasn't quiet either. Officers moved in and out of the main room, some laughing at private jokes, others speaking in low, professional tones. The normalcy of it all made Raymond's stomach twist. To them, this was nothing, just another night, another arrest, another black man in a cell. He exhaled slowly, shaking his head. His whole body ached, but the worst of it wasn't physical, it was the anger creeping into his chest, the frustration sitting heavy in his gut. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He knew getting stopped was a possibility, hell, that was the whole point, but the way it escalated so fast, the way they went straight to violence, left his hands curling into fists. They were waiting for it, he muttered under his breath, his voice hoarse. They didn't need a reason. His fingers flexed, trying to shake the stiffness. He needed to calm down, he needed to focus. He knew better than to let his emotions take over, especially now. One of the officers walked past the holding cell, barely glancing at him before dropping a file onto the desk at the front. Raymond leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "How long you planning on keeping me in here?" he asked, his voice even but firm. The officer barely acknowledged him, flipping through the paperwork. "Until we process everything." Raymond huffed out a laugh, shaking his head. "Process what? You didn't find anything on me, I didn't break any laws, you just needed an excuse." The officer finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "You can talk all you want, doesn't change the fact that you're sitting in that cell." Raymond clenched his jaw, inhaling slowly through his nose. "I want my phone call." "You'll get it when," the officer smirked faintly, "whenever we get to it." Raymond leaned back, pressing his lips together. He knew the game. They wanted him frustrated, wanted him to lash out so they could add more charges, extend the hold, keep him locked up just long enough for things to quiet down. But that wasn't going to happen. Lisa had the footage. The thought settled in his chest, steadying him. He had done his part, the rest was in motion now. Lisa sat at her desk, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, her pulse hammering in her ears. The room was dim, the only light coming from the glow of her laptop screen. The video was playing. She had seen a lot in her years as a journalist: protests turned violent, leaked body cam footage, grainy cell phone videos of injustice unfolding in real time. But this was different, this was clear, this was undeniable. She leaned forward, her hands gripping the edges of her desk as she watched the officers surround Raymond, their postures tense before the first push, the sneer, the shoves, the way they circled him. Then the first baton strike. She flinched when it hit, her fingers tightening, even though she had known what happened. Watching it unfold in crisp, high-quality footage made it feel heavier, more real. Raymond hadn't provoked them, he hadn't fought back, they had gone after him because they could. Lisa's stomach turned when the final strike sent him to the pavement, the moment the weight of both officers pressed down on him, the moment he stopped struggling, knowing there was no point. She felt something burn in her chest, anger, frustration, disbelief that this kept happening over and over again. Her phone sat next to her, but she couldn't bring herself to reach for it, not yet. She pressed play again, forcing herself to watch it from the beginning. She needed to be sure. The footage wasn't shaky, the sound was crisp, the words the officers used, the things they said, it was all there, no ambiguity, no gray areas. Lisa swallowed hard, exhaling through her nose. She reached for her phone, dialing a number with steady hands. It rang once, twice, then a voice picked up. This better be important. Her editor said, his voice groggy with sleep. Lisa didn't hesitate. I have something big. A pause, then his voice sharpened. How big? She glanced back at the screen, at the frozen image of Raymond on the ground, his face turned toward the camera, blood on his cheek, big enough to set the city on fire. Raymond sat in the holding cell, his head tilted back against the cold concrete wall, his body aching from the beating. The bruises were setting in now, a deep, throbbing ache in his ribs and arms that made even breathing a chore. He had tried to adjust his position on the hard bench, but there was no comfort here. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow over the room. Officers walked past the bars without looking at him, their conversations low and filled with laughter, as if he wasn't even there. The weight was deliberate, he knew it. They were making him sit, making him stew in it, letting the weight of what they had done settle in his bones. They wanted him frustrated, they wanted him angry, but he wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. The only thing keeping him steady was the knowledge that Lisa had the footage, the whole thing. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his wrists where the cuffs had been too tight. He had been in worse situations before, he had survived worse, but this wasn't just about him, this was bigger. And outside, the city was about to find out just how big. Lisa sat in her car, her laptop balanced on the center console, the video queued up on the screen, the unedited footage played from the moment Raymond entered the neighborhood, the entire interaction with the officers captured in crystal clarity, the taunts, the shoves, the first baton strike. There was no room for misinterpretation. She had called her editor, given him the rundown, but she knew this needed to move fast. The longer they waited, the easier it would be for the police to control the narrative. She didn't hesitate, she hit upload. Within minutes, it was out. She pushed open the door, stepping into the cool night air. Her phone buzzed almost instantly. Her editor, reporters she hadn't spoken to in months, community activists already demanding statements. She ignored the calls. The footage would speak for itself, and it did. Across the city, phones vibrated, notifications lit up screens, and people paused in their tracks as the video began spreading like wildfire. Social media exploded, loaded with outrage, the footage reposted across every platform, dissected frame by frame. The hashtag Justice for Raymond started trending within the hour. In Raymond's neighborhood, the reaction was immediate. Inside the corner store, a small crowd had gathered, the video playing on a customer's phone, heads clustered around the screen. The shop owner, Mr. Daniels, shook his head, his jaw tight as he watched Raymond take the first hit. That man served this country, he muttered, and look at how they treat him. A younger man beside him, maybe in his early 20s, scoffed, man, this is what happens when you go looking for trouble, he should have never been over there. An older woman standing behind them crossed her arms. He wasn't looking for trouble, he was trying to prove a point, and what did it prove? The younger man shot back, that they're going to do what they always do, that they can beat us down, lock us up, and nothing changes. It proves, Mr. Daniels said, his voice low and firm, that now the whole damn world can see it. Elsewhere, outside a local diner, two men leaned against the wall, one scrolling through his phone while the other paced. They didn't even hesitate, the first man said, shaking his head. They were waiting for an excuse. The second man exhaled, rubbing a hand down his face. Yeah, and now we got to figure out what we're going to do about it. This is bigger than just one arrest, the first man muttered. This is about all of us. The church doors down the street had been left open, the video playing on a projector inside. A group of community members sat in silence, watching Raymond's last words before the first baton came down. Reverend Harris, a man in his 60s with graying hair and sharp eyes, turned to the crowd. We cannot let this be just another story, he said, his voice steady. We cannot let this be forgotten. Some nodded, others murmured their agreement. Outside, a mother sat in her parked car, her hands gripping the steering wheel as the video looped on her phone screen. Her teenage son sat beside her, watching in silence. This is why I tell you to be careful, she said finally. The boy swallowed hard, but didn't look away. Inside the police station, the shift in atmosphere was palpable. Officers who had been laughing minutes ago now whispered among themselves, checking their phones, glancing toward the holding cells. The station chief stormed out of his office, a phone pressed to his ear, his voice sharp. How the hell did this get out so fast? The officer at the desk shifted uncomfortably. I don't know, sir, but it's everywhere. The chief swore under his breath. Where's Carter? Still in holding. Get him processed now. Raymond sat up straighter when he saw the movement outside his cell. The energy in the station had changed, something had shifted. The officer who had ignored him earlier now looked uneasy as he approached the bars. Looks like you're getting your phone call. Raymond didn't move right away. He let the moment sit, watching the officer's expression shift, then slowly he stood. Lisa had done her job, now it was time for the rest of the world to do theirs. Raymond sat at the metal table in the dimly lit processing room, a landline phone pressed against his ear. His ribs ached every time he inhaled, and his knuckles were still stiff from being cuffed too tightly. The air smelled like coffee and ink, the usual stench of a station where too many people had been processed before him. Lisa's voice came through the line, steady but urgent. They just let you make this call, she asked. Raymond exhaled, only because they don't have a choice anymore, they know what's happening. Lisa said, the video's everywhere, and the pressure is mounting, but they're already trying to spin it. Raymond rubbed his temple, wincing at the lingering pain from the officer's baton. Let me guess, big black guy attacks officers, they had to defend themselves? Exactly, Lisa confirmed, but it's not holding. Too many people saw what really happened. She hesitated, and there's more. Someone else was recording. Raymond sat up straighter. Who? A kid, high schooler. He was down the street when it happened, caught the whole thing from another angle. His footage is even worse for them. It shows the first officer checking if his body cam was off before they started hitting you. Raymond clenched his jaw. That's a game changer. It is, Lisa agreed, but there was hesitation in her voice. What's the problem? Raymond asked. He's scared, Lisa admitted, won't give me his name, says he doesn't want to get involved, doesn't trust the police to leave him alone if they find out he filmed it. Raymond leaned back in his chair, the chain on his cuffs rattling slightly. He understood the fear, a kid with footage like that, he had every reason to be afraid of the retaliation. We need to protect him, Raymond said, he can't do this alone. I told him we can blur his face, keep his identity out of it, but he's still hesitant, Lisa said. I need you to talk to him. Raymond exhaled through his nose. Give me his number. I don't have it, Lisa admitted, but he agreed to meet with me, said if I brought you into the conversation, he might reconsider. Raymond nodded. Then let's set it up. Lisa hesitated. Raymond, they're trying to turn this into a circus. Some media outlets are already calling you a repeat offender, even though you've never been arrested before. Doesn't surprise me, he said, they'll do anything to make me the bad guy. They've got officers saying you resisted arrest, Lisa added, that you were aggressive. Raymond let out a bitter chuckle. The footage proves otherwise. Yeah, Lisa said, her voice tight, but they're going to keep throwing everything they can at you. Raymond's fingers tapped against the table, his mind already working through the situation. Then we keep pushing, we get that kid's footage out there. The more proof we have, the harder it is for them to rewrite the truth. Lisa was quiet for a moment, then she said, all right, I'll set up the meeting, just hold tight, this isn't over yet. Raymond smirked, despite the pain in his ribs, it's just getting started. As he hung up the phone, he glanced at the officers lingering near the door. They weren't smiling anymore. Lisa's report was gaining traction, the footage was going viral, and now they had even more evidence coming. The truth was out, and the fight wasn't over. Raymond sat in the holding cell, his back against the cold cinder block wall, his wrists resting on his knees. The air in the station felt different now. Officers moved with less certainty, some avoiding his gaze altogether, others sneaking quick glances at him, like he was a loose thread in the fabric of their power, something they didn't quite know how to handle. The video was out, and they knew it, but they weren't backing down. His conversation with Lisa echoed in his head. A kid had footage that could change everything, but he was scared to come forward, and now the police were scrambling, not just to protect themselves, but to control the narrative. Footsteps echoed down the hall, and Raymond looked up as a uniformed officer approached. His expression was unreadable, but his posture was tense. "Carter," he said, unlocking the cell door. Raymond pushed himself up, his ribs stiff from the beating. "Am I finally getting my phone call?" The officer's lips pressed together. "Your lawyers are demanding your release." Raymond studied him, and the officer sighed. "The DA isn't budging yet." Raymond clenched his jaw. Of course, he had expected this. The district attorney was feeling the pressure from both sides, civil rights groups demanding justice, and the police union closing ranks. "The whole damn country has seen what happened," Raymond said. "What exactly is the holdup?" The officer hesitated before answering. "The DA's office is considering additional charges." Raymond let out a slow breath, his fingers curling into fists. "Unbelievable, they're not dropping this." The officer admitted, shifting uncomfortably. "At least not yet." A voice from behind made Raymond turn. "They won't, unless they're forced to." Raymond's eyes landed on a man leaning against the far wall, his posture relaxed, but his expression serious. He looked to be in his 50s, with a salt and pepper beard and sharp, tired eyes. He wasn't in uniform, but everything about him still read like a cop. Raymond narrowed his gaze. "Who are you?" The man stepped closer. "Darius King, used to be on the force." Raymond let out a humorless chuckle. "Let me guess, before things got bad?" King smirked slightly. "Before people had cameras to prove how bad it always was." Raymond studied him. He had the look of someone who had seen too much, who had tried to fight the system from the inside and lost. "You worked with them?" Raymond asked. "With Hale?" King nodded. "Long enough to see the damage he's done, long enough to know he doesn't make mistakes, he makes choices, and you were one of them." Raymond exhaled sharply. "So what happened? Why aren't you still wearing a badge?" King's expression darkened. "Because I refused to look the other way." Raymond crossed his arms, wincing slightly at the pain in his ribs. "Didn't work out, did it?" "No," King admitted. "I filed complaints, I pushed back, but the union always had his back. They made sure I was the one who paid the price." Raymond shook his head. "And now you're here, why?" King glanced at the bars, then back at Raymond. "Because I know exactly how this plays out. Internal Affairs will investigate, but they won't take real action unless the pressure stays on. Meanwhile, the union is already circling the wagons, spinning this into a story about how you resisted." Raymond scoffed. "I didn't resist." King gave him a knowing look. "Doesn't matter, they'll say you did. They'll dig through your past, try to find anything they can use against you. If they don't find something, they'll make people believe something was there anyway." Raymond clenched his jaw. "I don't have a record." King smirked bitterly. "Won't stop them from making you the villain." Raymond took a slow breath, steadying himself. "So why are you telling me this? What do you want?" "I want to help," King said simply. "I've been where you are. I know how these investigations go. If you want a chance at real justice, you're going to need people who understand the system." Raymond studied him for a long moment before nodding. "All right, let's talk." King nodded back. "Good, because if we don't move fast, they're going to bury this before it even starts." Raymond glanced at the officers lingering near the desk. They weren't laughing anymore, they were waiting, watching, hoping this would blow over. Raymond sat on the edge of the hard cot in his cell, his elbows resting on his knees, his fingers intertwined. The minutes stretched into hours, and the weight of everything settled onto his shoulders. He had known this fight wouldn't be easy, but he hadn't expected it to feel this personal, this suffocating. His phone was gone, but he knew exactly what was happening outside. He was the story now, not the officers, not the system, not the brutality caught on camera, him. The smear campaign had started fast. The police union had gone on the offensive, spinning the narrative into something else entirely. Raymond Carter, aggressive ex-Marine with a history of confrontations, the full story, what the video doesn't show. Did Raymond Carter provoke the officers? They were doing what they always did, controlling the narrative, shifting the focus, making people question what their own eyes had seen. The headlines were relentless, twisting facts, digging for anything in his past they could use against him, and worse, they were going after his family. He exhaled sharply, his chest tight as he thought about his mother. She had called, Dana, in tears, her voice shaking over the phone. His mother had seen the reports. People had shown up outside her house, journalists knocking on her door, shoving microphones in her face. Some had even gone through their old social media posts, trying to find something, anything, to paint them as troubled, as flawed, as deserving of the treatment Raymond had endured. Dana had handled it the way she always did, head on, but she was exhausted, and Raymond knew it. The door to the cell block buzzed open. Raymond looked up, expecting an officer, but instead, he saw his lawyer, a tall, composed black woman in a navy blazer and glasses that gave her the air of someone who had been through too many battles and still had plenty of fight left in her. Nia Caldwell. She had been one of the first lawyers to take his case after Lisa's report went viral, and from the moment she walked in, Raymond knew she was the right person for the job. She sat across from him, pulling out a folder. You doing all right? Raymond let out a dry chuckle. I've been better. Nia nodded. The DA is still stalling. They know they can't hold you forever, but they're waiting to see how the public shifts before they make a move. Raymond's jaw tightened. So they're trying to see if this blows over. Exactly, Raymond sighed. And what's the union saying? Nia's eyes darkened. They're in full defense mode, saying the officers acted appropriately, that you were a threat, that they feared for their lives. Raymond let out a slow breath. Same script, different name. Pretty much, Nia said. And they're using every connection they have to pressure the DA into keeping you here. Raymond shook his head, the frustration mounting. And my family? Nia hesitated for a moment. It's getting bad. Raymond clenched his fists. I need to see them. I know, she said. I'm working on getting you released, but they're playing games. We've got the video, we've got public support, but they're betting they can ride it out until people lose interest. Raymond's stomach twisted. Lisa won't let that happen. Nia gave a small smirk. No, she won't, and she's not the only one keeping the pressure up. She slid a folder across the table. Raymond hesitated before flipping it open. Inside were printed screenshots, messages, names, stories. I started collecting them as soon as the video went viral, Nia explained. People started reaching out, people from your neighborhood, people from across the city, all with their own stories about Hale and officers like him. Raymond scanned the pages, testimonies from black men who had been harassed for walking in the wrong neighborhood, parents whose teenage sons had been stopped for no reason, workers pulled over and searched on their way home. One message stood out, a handwritten letter scanned into the file. I was 15 when it happened to me. Officer Hale stopped me on my way home from school, said I matched a description. I was too scared to fight back when he threw me against the car, too scared to tell my mom what really happened, but I see what they did to Raymond, and I can't stay silent anymore. Raymond exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. They were just waiting for someone to come forward first. Nia said, and now they are. Raymond closed the folder, his ribs still ached, his head was pounding, but for the first time since this all started, something inside him felt stronger. They're not going to bury this, he said. No, Nia agreed, they're not. Raymond leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. He was still behind bars, still in the thick of it, but outside, the fight was growing. And this time, he wasn't fighting alone. Raymond sat in the holding cell, his arms resting on his knees as he listened to the faint hum of voices beyond the bars. He knew something had changed. The air in the station felt heavier, charged with something different. The officers moved with an unease that hadn't been there before. They weren't laughing, they weren't making casual remarks as they passed by his cell, because they knew Internal Affairs was digging. And what they were finding wasn't just about what had happened to him, it was bigger. Raymond heard footsteps approaching. He looked up as Nia Caldwell appeared outside his cell, her face unreadable. The guard unlocked the door, allowing her inside. She took a seat across from him, opening a folder. They're still stalling on your release, she said, her voice calm, but edged with frustration. Raymond exhaled sharply. What's the excuse now? They're pretending they need more time to review the full scope of the incident. Nia shook her head, which is ridiculous, because the entire country has already seen what happened. But the good news is, Internal Affairs has started pulling records on Hale's team. Raymond's eyebrows lifted, and Nia leaned forward. It's bad, worse than we thought, multiple excessive force complaints, racial profiling reports, cases that were quietly settled out of court. Hale alone has been accused of misconduct at least 7 times in the last 5 years, but none of it stuck. Raymond's jaw tightened. Why? The same reason it never does. Reports went missing, witnesses changed their statements, the union stepped in every time things got close to real accountability. Raymond let the information sink in. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed only made his anger simmer hotter. And now? He asked. Nia smirked. Now they can't bury it, not with all the attention on this case. She flipped through her notes. Lisa's been relentless. Every time the department tries to shift the focus, she counters with more evidence, and it's working. People are pissed. Raymond leaned back. How bad is it? Nia studied him. Bad enough that they've had to put Hale and his entire team on paid leave. The department is trying to act like it's just procedural, but Internal Affairs is treating it like a real investigation. They're pulling body cam footage, reviewing old cases. This could unravel everything. Raymond nodded slowly. Good. Nia hesitated. There's more. Raymond frowned. What? She sighed. There are protests all over the city. People are marching outside the station, outside City Hall, even in front of the DA's office. They're demanding your release, but it's not just about you anymore. Other people are coming forward. People who had run-ins with Hale's unit. The city is waking up, and law enforcement doesn't know how to handle it. Raymond's hands clenched into fists. It was working, the truth was coming out, but with that truth came risk. I need to see my family, he said quietly. Nia's expression softened. Dana and your mother have been speaking out. They've done interviews, talked about what this is doing to them, to you. Raymond exhaled, a knot tightening in his chest. His mother was strong, but he knew this was breaking her in ways he couldn't protect her from. Are they safe? He asked. Nia nodded. For now, but they've been harassed, calls, threats, reporters camping outside their house. Raymond's jaw locked. They shouldn't have to deal with this. They know that, Nia said, but they also know you can't fight this alone. Raymond ran a hand down his face. He was exhausted, his body still aching, but he wasn't broken, not yet. He looked up at Nia. How do we push harder? Nia's eyes gleamed. We keep the heat on, we keep the media focused on the corruption, on the fact that the police still have you in here without charges. The more attention this gets, the more pressure the DA will feel. Raymond nodded. And Internal Affairs? They're at a crossroads, Nia said. They either expose the truth or they risk being seen as complicit. She smirked. And they're not about to go down with Hale. Raymond let out a slow breath. Then let's keep pushing. As Nia stood, the sound of voices outside the station grew louder. Chants, protesters, justice for Raymond. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, it felt like they had the momentum, and Raymond wasn't going to let it go to waste. Susan Calder had never been the kind of investigator to take the easy way out. A seasoned internal affairs officer with over 15 years in the department, she had built a reputation for being thorough, unshakable, and, much to the frustration of her superiors, not easily controlled. She didn't play politics, she followed the facts, and the facts in front of her were damning. She sat at her desk, her fingers drumming against the thick file in front of her. The pages were filled with reports, witness statements, and internal affairs preliminary findings on Officer Hale and his team. Every single page pointed to a pattern, a system that had allowed officers like Hale to operate unchecked for years. And yet, the pressure from the top was clear: shut it down. The office door swung open. Assistant Chief Brandon Tate stepped inside, his presence filling the space with quiet authority. He was in his early 50s, a man who had worked his way through the ranks, known for handling department scandals with as little collateral damage as possible. He shut the door behind him and folded his arms. Calder, we need to talk. Susan didn't look up. That's what this is, isn't it? Tate sighed, stepping closer to the desk. I just got off the phone with the commissioner. The mayor's office is breathing down our necks. The union is already calling this an overreach. Susan finally met his gaze, her expression unreadable. An overreach? She tapped the file. We have multiple excessive force complaints tied to Hale's unit, reports that were ignored, covered up, or mysteriously lost. This investigation is barely scratching the surface. Tate leaned on the desk, his voice lowering. You think I don't know that? Then why are we even having this conversation? Because this is bigger than just one unit, Tate said, his tone sharp. If we push too hard, we expose the entire department to lawsuits, scrutiny, and public distrust. We might never recover from it. Susan's jaw tightened. Public trust is already gone, sir. You've seen what's happening outside. The protests aren't just about Raymond Carter anymore. People are coming forward with stories of harassment, racial profiling, and excessive force. If we try to sweep this under the rug, we only prove them right. Tate exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. You think I don't see that? But this isn't just about justice, Calder, it's about politics. If this case goes too deep, it doesn't stop with Hale, it goes all the way up, and then where does that leave us? Susan narrowed her eyes. Maybe it leaves us where we should have been all along, actually holding people accountable. Tate's gaze hardened. You don't understand how this works. No, Susan said, standing up, her voice unwavering. I understand exactly how it works. I understand that for years, Hale got away with this because the people in power let him. I understand that if we back down now, we are no better than the officers who looked away while he brutalized people. Tate shook his head, his voice lowering. If we bury this, the department survives. Susan took a slow breath, and if we don't, maybe it finally changes. A silence stretched between them. Tate's jaw tightened. You're not backing down, are you? No, she said simply, I'm not. Tate let out a long exhale, then straightened. Fine, but you better be damn sure you can finish this fight, because once it's out of the department's hands, there's no coming back. Susan watched him leave, her heart pounding. She already knew there was no coming back. This case was going to shake the entire system, and she was ready. Lisa sat across from Darius King and Nia Caldwell in the back of a small cafe, her laptop open in front of her. The screen glowed with headlines, social media feeds, and breaking news segments that were covering the case. The protests had grown larger, the pressure on the department was mounting, but with that pressure came resistance. They're pushing back harder, Lisa said, scrolling through an article. More media outlets are running hit pieces on Raymond, calling him reckless and combative. They're framing the protests as unrest instead of what they really are, people demanding justice. King leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand down his face. It's what they do. If they can't make him disappear, they'll make him the villain. Nia was flipping through documents, her expression unreadable. The DA is still dragging their feet, even with the protests, even with internal affairs starting to crack open old cases. They're hoping to wait it out. They think if they stall long enough, public outrage will shift to something else. Lisa sighed, closing her laptop. So what do we do? King smirked slightly. We don't give them time to breathe. Lisa leaned forward, intrigued. What are you thinking? King folded his arms. We have stories, not just Raymond, other people are coming forward, right? Let's put them out there, not in some polished press conference, not in some carefully worded news segment. We take their words directly to the people, video interviews, live streams, let them tell their own experiences. Lisa's eyes widened slightly. You want to bypass traditional media? King nodded. The mainstream outlets are playing both sides, afraid to call this what it really is, but the internet, social media, that's where we win. Lisa exchanged a glance with Nia, who gave a slow nod. It's risky, the lawyer admitted, but it's the best way to keep the momentum. Lisa tapped her fingers against the table, already forming a plan. All right, I can start reaching out to the people who sent us messages, we'll record their stories, make sure they're protected. Nia set her folder down. Meanwhile, I'll ramp up legal pressure. I have contacts in civil rights groups, advocacy organizations. If the DA won't move, we force their hand. King cracked his knuckles. And I'll handle the street side. I know officers who left because of Hale. They might not want to talk publicly, but they'll talk to me, if I can get them on record. Lisa nodded. That would be huge. A weight settled between them. This was the moment, the tipping point. If they didn't act now, if they didn't push harder, the system would bury the case like it had so many before it. Lisa took a deep breath. Then let's make our move. The night air was thick with tension as Lisa set up her camera in the dimly lit office space she had rented for the interviews. The walls were bare, the furniture minimal, just a few chairs, a desk, and a tripod with her camera set up against the plain backdrop. It wasn't polished, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the stories they were about to capture. She glanced at the time on her phone. The first speaker would be arriving any minute. Darius King stood near the window, his arms crossed, scanning the street below. His face was set in a deep frown. They know what we're doing, he muttered. I got word from some guys still in the department. Officers are warning people to stay quiet. Lisa tightened the camera's focus, adjusting the frame. How bad is it? King let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. Bad enough that they're trying to intimidate people before they even say a word. But you know what that tells me? He turned to look at her. It tells me they're scared. Lisa met his gaze. Good, they should be. The door to the office opened, and Lisa turned, straightening up as a woman entered. She was in her mid-40s, dressed conservatively in a gray sweater and slacks, her posture stiff with nerves, her fingers gripped the strap of her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. Lisa stepped forward, offering a gentle smile. "Angela Brooks?" The woman nodded. "Yes, I almost didn't come." King stepped forward, his voice steady but reassuring. "We understand, you don't have to do this if you're not ready." Angela took a deep breath, standing in place for a long moment before finally shaking her head. "No, I need to. My son, he was lucky, we got him up before they could ruin his life, but how many others didn't?" Lisa gestured toward the chair in front of the camera. "Take your time, just tell your story." Angela hesitated before slowly lowering herself into the chair. She exhaled shakily, clasping her hands together in her lap. The camera light blinked red, recording. She looked into the lens. "My son was 17 when they arrested him. They said he fit the description of a robbery suspect." She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly before continuing. "He was coming home from a friend's house, just walking, but they threw him against the hood of a police car, searched his pockets, called him a thug." Her voice wavered, but she kept going. "They put him in the system. It took us months to clear his name. He still has nightmares about that night." Lisa sat behind the camera, nodding silently, not rushing her. Angela's fingers twisted together in her lap. "I tried to file a complaint, they shut me down, said if I kept pushing, they'd find something on him." She let out a bitter laugh. "He was a kid, a straight-A student, and they wanted to ruin him." King exhaled, shaking his head. He had seen this too many times. Angela's eyes burned with restrained anger. "Hale and his team, they do this because they know no one will stop them." Lisa glanced at King, and they exchanged a silent understanding. This was bigger than Raymond, it always had been. By the time Angela finished, Lisa's phone was buzzing non-stop, messages from people who had seen the video and wanted to tell their stories too, others asking how they could help. The fight was growing. Meanwhile, across the city, Nia Caldwell sat in a conference room with representatives from several civil rights organizations. The energy in the room was tense but determined. "We have momentum," one of the activists said, setting a stack of petitions onto the table. "People are rallying behind Raymond's case, but we need to push harder. The DA is stalling because they think this will die down." Nia said, flipping through her notes, "We need to show them that it won't." One of the lawyers, an older man with graying hair, nodded. "We've already filed motions demanding an expedited review of Raymond Carter's case. If they don't act soon, we take it higher." Nia leaned forward, her tone sharp. "And what about internal affairs?" A woman sitting at the far end of the table, a former prosecutor turned activist, folded her hands together. "They're investigating, but they're not moving fast enough. They're being careful, which means they're being hesitant. They're still hoping the pressure will die down." Nia exhaled through her nose. "Then we make sure it doesn't." A younger activist, scrolling through their phone, suddenly spoke up. "The protests are getting bigger. They're shutting down streets downtown. People are chanting Raymond's name, demanding the officers be fired, but they hesitated. I'm also seeing counter-protests forming." Nia's expression darkened. "Figures, the police union supporters are coming out." Lisa had warned them this would happen. It was the same pattern every time. Whenever there was pushback against police misconduct, there would be people rushing to defend the system, no matter how damning the evidence. Nia sat back, collecting her thoughts. "All right, we keep the legal pressure up. We push for more community testimonies. The DA wants this to go away. We make sure it's the only thing anyone is talking about." Back in the small office, Lisa closed her laptop, looking over at King. "People are coming forward faster than we expected." King nodded. "That's good, but it also means we need to move smart. The cops still have power. They're not going down without a fight." Lisa's jaw tightened. "Neither are we." The movement was growing, the truth was spreading, and soon, the people who thought they could silence it would have to face the consequences. The sound of protest chants echoed through the streets outside the police department headquarters as Susan Calder sat at her desk, her eyes scanning the latest batch of documents in front of her. The case against Officer Hale and his unit had been unraveling for days, but now she had something that changed everything: real, undeniable evidence. She pushed back from her desk and stood, clutching the folder in her hands as she stepped into the main internal affairs briefing room. Several officers and investigators were already gathered, murmuring among themselves, tension thick in the air. The protests outside hadn't stopped growing, and neither had the pressure from the media. At the front of the room stood Captain Reyes, head of internal affairs. He looked up as Susan walked in, his expression unreadable. "Calder, you have something?" Susan nodded. "I do. She dropped the folder onto the table, flipping it open. We just uncovered sealed complaints filed against Officer Hale that date back 10 years, some were formally dismissed, but others, they were conveniently lost before reaching disciplinary hearings. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Reyes frowned, flipping through the documents. How did we not know about this before? Susan's jaw clenched, because it was buried, someone higher up made sure of it. She reached into her bag and pulled out another file, and it gets worse. Some of the old reports connect Hale to previous cases involving the same pattern: false arrests, excessive force, targeting black men in wealthier neighborhoods. This isn't just about Raymond Carter, it's about a system that let Hale operate without consequences for years. An older investigator, Detective Jimenez, leaned forward. Are we talking about cases where people served time because of his actions? Susan nodded, at least 5 that we can confirm. She turned the page to reveal a highlighted case, one of them, a young man named Elijah Raines, arrested on trumped-up charges of resisting arrest. The officer on duty, she tapped the name at the top of the document, Hale. Jimenez exhaled sharply. I remember that case. Kid swore up and down he didn't do anything, but the department backed Hale. It ruined that boy's life. Reyes pinched the bridge of his nose. Damn it. Susan pressed on. That's why we can't let this get buried. If we take real action, we don't just get justice for Raymond Carter, we start fixing this mess before more people get hurt. Reyes was silent for a long moment before he let out a slow breath. All right, Hale's done. The room went still. We're moving forward with termination and official charges, Reyes continued. We're also suspending the rest of his unit while we conduct full reviews of their cases. No more administrative leave, no more wait and see, we do this by the book. Susan nodded, but she wasn't done. That's not enough. Reyes looked at her, brow raised. Excuse me? If we stop at Hale, we're just cutting off a limb while the disease is still spreading, Susan said firmly. Someone covered for him, someone protected him for 10 years. She looked around the room. You want to regain public trust, start holding the people at the top accountable too. A few of the investigators exchanged uneasy glances. They all knew what she meant. Reyes hesitated, but then he nodded. Fine, you keep digging, find out how deep this goes. Susan met his gaze. I will. The protest chants outside grew louder. The department internal email system buzzed with official notices. Officer Hale terminated, Officer Grant suspended pending review, Officer Daniels suspended, Officer Phillips under investigation. The department wasn't just taking action against Hale, his entire unit was under fire. Inside the precinct, officers whispered among themselves, some shocked, others furious. A few of Hale's supporters grumbled about betrayal, others, those who had been forced to work alongside him, silently packed up their desks, knowing their time was coming too. Hale himself sat in a small, windowless conference room, his badge and gun already confiscated. A representative from the police union sat next to him, stone-faced, while across the table, Captain Reyes read the official charges aloud. Hale's face was unreadable, but his hands were clenched into fists under the table. This is a joke, he muttered. You're making me a scapegoat. Reyes didn't flinch. No, we're holding you accountable. The door opened, and 2 officers stepped inside. Officer Hale, you are officially under arrest. Hale's jaw tightened, but he didn't resist as the cuffs snapped around his wrists. For the first time in his career, he was on the other side of the law, and this time, no one was going to cover for him. Susan watched from her office window as Hale was led out the back entrance of the precinct. His face was set, his shoulders stiff, but this time, there were no cameras to spin the story in his favor. A small satisfaction settled in her chest, but she knew this was just the beginning. She turned back to her desk, flipping open a new file. Hale wasn't the last, there were more, and she was going to take down every last one of them. The city felt different now. For years, the community had whispered about the things that happened in the shadows, the sudden stops, the unnecessary searches, the way certain officers seemed untouchable, but now, for the first time, those whispers had become shouts. Word spread fast. Officer Hale and his entire unit were gone, not just suspended, not reassigned, gone, their names stripped from the precinct roster, their badges taken, their faces on the news, not as law enforcement, but as criminals. And the city celebrated. At first, it was small gatherings, neighbors stepping onto porches, exchanging looks that said, finally. Then it grew, people poured into the streets, not in anger, not in protest, but in relief. Outside the precinct, a crowd formed, not with signs of frustration, but with voices lifted in victory. You hear that? An older man said, standing with his arms crossed as he looked up at the police station. That silence, no more of them out here doing whatever they want. A group of teenagers who had grown up knowing to avoid certain streets when Hale was on duty stood with their heads high. One of them, a boy barely 16, wiped at his eyes before shaking his head. I thought they were untouchable. They wanted us to think that, his mother said, resting a hand on his shoulder. They wanted all of us to think that, but now they had proof that the badge wasn't a shield against consequences. Across town, in the neighborhoods that had suffered the most under Hale's watch, music played from open windows, families gathered on sidewalks, not just talking about what had happened, but about what came next. People who had once been too afraid to speak up shared their stories openly. They weren't just angry anymore. They weren't just mourning lost time, lost years, lost lives, they were hopeful. Inside the police department, it was a different story. The officers who had once moved through the halls with certainty now walked in silence. The ones who had laughed at the complaints, who had looked the other way, who had told themselves they were just doing their jobs, they didn't speak now. They didn't make eye contact with each other, because Hale was gone, and so were the people who had protected him. The weight of it settled in. A young officer, fresh to the force, passed by an older detective and muttered, "I never thought they'd actually." The detective cut him off with a look. Neither did they. It wasn't just Hale's reputation that had crumbled, it was the entire illusion that officers like him would always get away with it. Captain Reyes watched it all unfold from his office window. He could hear the voices outside, the sound of a community that had one. His gut twisted, not with anger, not even with frustration, with regret. He had known, maybe not every detail, maybe not every name, but he had known enough, and he hadn't stopped it. Susan Calder stepped into the room behind him. He didn't turn to look at her. She didn't speak right away, just let the weight of the silence settle before saying, "It didn't have to take this long." Reyes let out a slow breath. "I know." Susan moved beside him, looking out at the celebration happening just beyond the glass.